Our next speaker will be Craig Labenz, a developer relations engineer at Google. Craig's been exploring the advantages and challenges of using AI, not just to generate content, but to actually generate the user interface itself. Please give a warm welcome to Craig.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Design for the Future of Apps. As they said, my name is Craig Labenz, and I've been working in open source at Google for the last 7 years. And specifically within open source, I've been working on a thing called Flutter, which is a multi-platform UI toolkit designed by Google. But don't worry, we give away Flutter for free, so you have not accidentally stumbled your way into a timeshare sales pitch. But it turns out that Flutter is not the only thing that the Flutter team gives away for free. The other thing that we give away is coffee. So this harebrained scheme was called GenLatte, and I personally spent my spring building out this demo. And we stood it up twice, once at Google's big cloud event in Las Vegas, Google Cloud Next, and then again at Google I/O in Mountain View just this past May. And GenLatte's idea is pretty simple. We wanted users to be able to work with Gemini and Nano Banana to create an image of their personal happy place. And then world-class baristas would make a very real latte and print that image of their happy place on top of the coffee using edible ink printers. So here is somebody's happy place, adorably with their dog, probably on a hike or some such. And here was my happy place at the I/O version of this, celebrating what at that time was a margarita. So you could see where my head was at after a long day at the conference. Now, GenLatte was so named not just because it had generative AI, which of course it did, it was contractually obligated to, it's 2026, but also because it had another thing in it altogether called GenUI, standing for Generative User Interface. But before we can understand how GenUI factored into GenLatte, we must first understand GenLatte itself. So the ordering flow was as follows. You'd start it out, you give it your name, you configure the drink, you tell the baristas how you want this thing to taste, and then you enter your happy place. And this would just be whatever the first thing that came to mind was. A lot of people would put, on a hike with my family. And then Nano Banana would get to work, and it would create a batch of images representing that place. But if even the best image out of that batch didn't quite match what you were imagining, you could continue the adventure and answer some more questions that had been authored by Gemini in advance. So for example, if you said your happy place was at the zoo with your family, Gemini might say, all right, well, what animal exhibit are you at? And how big is your family? And what time of day is it? And whatnot. And then you'd get another batch of images, and you could continue. And this is where GenUI came into play, because you can see that these questions do not all require the same user interface to help users answer them. There's multiple choice questions here. There's also different kinds of sliders. There were open-ended questions that were best served by just a text box. So GenUI was how we met each question, helped users answer each question. And this is all kind of getting a little abstract. It might feel abstract. So let's zoom in a little bit, especially so we can get to the concerns that are relevant for designers. So all of this is pointing to the question, what is GenUI? And most people think of AI these days as either coding assistants. Obviously, that's extraordinarily popular. It could also be an agent running autonomously on your laptop and opening up bank accounts in your name that you did not ask for. Or it could be the chat interfaces where we seek low-grade therapy from different LLMs. But at Google, we started to wonder, well, what if these agents could respond to users' needs, not just with walls of text that nobody wants to read, but instead rich, ephemeral user interfaces. And so after months of thinking and the scratching of many chins, this idea started to coalesce, and we call it GenUI. And there's even a protocol for it called A2UI, standing for Agent to User Interface, and that's its logo there on the right. Now, this is mercifully not a technical tour of that protocol, but instead an exploration of the kinds of questions that come out of following this paradigm. So it's an invitation to all of you to ponder those questions with us, because engineers have opened a real can of worms with this, and we're going to need designers to help us make sense of it. And these questions touch every aspect of app development, ranging from your design systems to how you prototype early versions of your app, to basic UX concerns around consistency and affordances, to even your server bill every time a user launches your app. Because as the world has found out in the last few months, tokens are actually not free. And now, if you would like to explore this protocol that I'm going to gloss right over, then you can head to a2ui.org and have yourself a read. So, is the future of apps GenUI? Well, maybe. I think it really depends on the app itself. So it could be true that it's the future for some apps. But as I was building GenLatte this spring, I started to realize that GenUI is not just a Boolean that your app either has or doesn't have. Instead, it's much more of a spectrum with a dial that you can tune up and down. And as you move up and down that spectrum, you really transform your app. So to grasp this spectrum, I'm going to propose to us a 4-tiers system of GenUI adoption. And you could, of course, imagine a totally different number of tiers. There's a continuum between each of these tiers. So this is by no means in an official list, but it helps me reason about where we're going in 2026 and beyond. So first, to level set all the way on the left, well, I guess this is your all's left, is level 0 with 0 GenUI and completely deterministic user interfaces. And I'm calling this one-sided UI because all of your UI logic probably lives on the server, think like Wikipedia, or in the client. That would be most web apps these days, or presumably, though I've never seen the source code, even the Figma design client. And this category covers the vast majority of apps ever made. It also covers some surprising interfaces, like earlier versions of the web interfaces to talk to Gemini, ChatGPT, or Claude. So the key insight here is that even though an LLM is providing non-deterministic answers to our deepest questions about life, the code itself, which receives that answer and shows it to the user, is deterministic. So code and UI code and content are different things. So to advance to level 1, which I'm calling full stack UI, what you would probably do is mix and match where the responsibilities fall between your client and your server. And I think generally these days, how that tends to play out is that the server fills in some blanks on what is otherwise a primarily client-driven UI. I think a lot of news websites live in this space these days, where some simple front-end code knows how to put all the paragraphs of the article into some p tags and show it to the user. But the server might have final say on where ads get placed or how other related news stories are represented. Also, dynamic and flexible A/B testing frameworks are really well suited by this architecture. But level 0 and level 1 are siblings in my mind because they share this attribute of being completely deterministic, which is a little bit of a spoiler for how you move on to level 2, which I'm elegantly calling AI-driven, server-driven UI, which really begs the question, who's driving this thing? But what you do at this level is you start to sprinkle in some AI magic into the server part of your already split UI responsibilities. So you've got ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, et cetera, helping you work out what to show the user in real time. And to me, this is when you actually finally start to enter GenUI land, because your UI is no longer deterministic. And GenLatte, the coffee disseminating apparatus that I've been droning on about, was a level 2 UI, because these questions were dreamed up on the server by Gemini, and then they were sent down to the client as UI directives. Now, level 2 questions level 2 UIs ask some very interesting questions of us that are going to force designers and developers to collaborate. So for example, GenLatte has this catalog of card widgets which know how to show users the questions that they would need to tweak the images that they were looking at. But when I was writing that widget, I didn't know how long the question was going to be. Also didn't know what aspect ratio I was going to be rendering in. Obviously, responsive components and overflowing text are nothing new, but it's a little weirder. Like, you expect to see that kind of stuff in maybe the review body or like a comment body. It's a little weirder if what's supposed to be the page's H1 or H2 ends in an ellipses. That would make me think, wow, this is a really broken UI. Another question that I had to deal with was just not knowing for the multiple choice questions, for example, how many options Gemini was going to give me. And sometimes it would put one word in each of the options, like in this screenshot, and other times it'd be like, here, have a whole sentence. So how do we fit all of this dynamic content into the available space that we have? Well, for GenLatte, I had to lay out on a sort of like shadow canvas in advance all the text and measure every single pixel that was consumed by those letters. And for the buttons of multiple choice questions, I even had to count the padding within the button and the border thickness itself and figure out when they were going to line wrap. And then I would tweak the font sizes until everything fit. And that worked insofar as it got rid of the surprising ellipses, but it came at great cost. It came at the cost of great complexity within that component. And also sometimes I would have surprisingly sized text. So did I create the best possible UX for users of this demo? I'm personally invested in thinking so, because I've already subjected thousands of people to it over several events. But in the future, I would love to work with more designers on questions of that category. Now, to get to level 3, there's a couple more dials that you need to turn, and we're going to talk about those. But if you make it all the way to the end, and you become a GenUI maximalist, things ultimately end up becoming something of an AI take-the-wheel situation. And there's two primary differences between level 2 and level 3. The first one is that the further you go toward level 3, the more control over and the more freedom over your UI you are probably delegating to your AI agent. So you might literally say, here's our design system, here's our grid rules, and here's the user and what we think they're trying to do. Go crazy. And you can see how that's a categorically different beast than a full level 2 situation where the AI has just kind of targeted control over a limited space of your user interface. You might also, this is the second thing, you might also, as you go further toward level 3, ultimately end up delegating the complete application state to the AI agent. And what this can mean is that when you click a button, when your user clicks a button in your interface, there might not be any local code that you run immediately to favorite the item or submit the form or whatever that button does. No, instead, a couple hundred milliseconds ago, when the AI agent decided that this UI needed a button there, it already paired it with a server-side action, probably like a tool call, if you're familiar with those. And then your application on the front end just says, well, hello again, Mr. or Mrs. AI man. Remember that button that you gave me in the UI? Well, the user clicked it, so have fun. And then it's the AI's job to figure out how this application state changes and what happens next. Maybe that's just a local UI update or a full navigation event. So I've been going on about, again, GenLatte, but the Flutter team this spring also made a level 3 demo. So this is called Hatcha, and it's a party planning app where Gemini plays a sort of improvised game of 20 questions with users until it acquires all the information it needs to fully have a pitch deck for this event that you want to throw. And both aspects of the both distinct aspects of level 3 UIs were in play here, both the full delegation of UI composition and the delegation of the AI's internal state. Because how could I, as someone working on Hatcha in advance, know exactly what would be required to represent the event that you want to throw you're going to be asked 20 unpredictable questions to figure out what this is going to look like. So as the Hatcha UI plays here, just like level 2 had its own questions that it forced upon us, level 3 user interfaces or GenUI interfaces also ask some hard questions of designers and developers. So, and I think these primarily orbit around kind of information hierarchy and UX consistency. So to explore that some more, you can think about the level of UI granularity that you give to your AI agent. So on the left there is a coarse-grained catalog where you're passing the AI kind of high-level, self-aware, intelligent UI components. And that is more of a level 2 style, and that has the strength of affording your users more UX consistency, more predictability, but of course at the cost of unbounded creativity in what UIs you can show. And the reason, of course, that you get that higher consistency and predictability is that those components can bake into themselves knowledge of what's going on. They can have error and success affordances. They can show progress bars. They can know how to lay out their children amidst surprising constraints. They can know that things need to be able to scroll potentially. And then if you flip all of those details, you see a finer grain widget catalog. So this would be where you, like I was saying earlier, give your AI agent just your design system. These are our buttons. This is how we render text. These are our containers. This is a list. This is a grid. Like, have fun. And that opens up a really wide range of things that your app can do that you never even predicted in advance, but of course, at the cost of consistency and predictability. Now, level 3 GenUI is not all craziness with no upside. Imagine a scenario where you keep some tallies of user actions that people take in your app amidst all of the actions that they could have taken. And then you bundle that information into a request that you send to an LLM when it's time to generate a new interface for a user. Well, it could notice that some poor user keeps following a journey that stretches through 4 screens. And then it could compose on the fly a new screen that just has everything that person needs. And now if that user is still successful in their quest here, you could actually cache that output of the A2 UI protocol and save on the token cost the next time that user shows up. So zooming out a little bit, regardless of your GenUI tier, I think you can think of each screen in your app as a touch point where your client and your server come together and say, OK, we've got this user here. What are they trying to do? What should we show them? Where are they within this page? OK, they just took an action. Now what do we do? And the more of those questions that you delegate to an AI agent at runtime, the deeper you've gone into GenUI land. So GenUI is here, which means that if GenUI is the future of some apps, it would follow that the future of some apps is also here. Now, the chaos of these non-deterministic UIs is both exciting and kind of scary. Right now, in its final form, by which I mean level 3 on this spectrum that I just totally made up, this implies turning almost everything into a network request. And they're slower than old world network requests we're used to, because an LLM has to think about stuff, and you have to pay the tokens for all of those things. But those downsides are not going to last forever, because Gemma 4, Google's premier on-device model, can already drive GenUI experiences on a powerful laptop. So unless something plateaus really soon, that's going to be running comfortably on phones in just a few years. And that is going to mitigate a lot of those downsides and possibly open up GenUI to becoming a much more realistic and appropriate option for a wider array of apps. And who knows, maybe one day you will be working on just such an app. Thanks so much.